Start us off today with a little bit of a PowerPoint, and then we'll get into the software as well as back to the PowerPoint a couple times. So to kind of kick us off here, let's talk about what our key problems are and what we're trying to address. So when you work with large scale projects and you're collaborating with architects and manufacturers, there's a lot of common issues that occur during this sort of collaboration. That could be stale or inaccurate data by using, let's say, a synchronous drive like let's say Dropbox or things like that, which may not keep in lockstep with your design software. We'll also be understanding that in large scale collaborations that sometimes design requirements are not being met. So we need to make sure that those are being tracked and are being met throughout the process. Other common issues are things such as issue tracking and resolution. So for instance, if I have a problem with something the architect did or something the manufacturer did for a piece of equipment, how do we track those and how do we go about resolution of that? How do we have an audit trail on those sorts of things? And also just general coordination of the models and clash detection, making sure everything can be cohesively put together. And this is all geared around having to avoid expensive change orders. So nothing is more irritating than getting a piece of machinery into a new facility and then finding out you have to spend $10,000 to move some HVAC ducting or some plumbing out of the way of this new capital expenditure of a machine you purchased. So some of our objectives today are to develop ways to provide this critical BIM information to building system designers and to also understand techniques of consuming and identifying changes to project data, and to develop the bidirectional communication between Revit and Inventor. We'll be looking at that, and to understand the communication process for tracking markups and issues inside of a project. So for that, we're going to take a look at first a current brownfield and how to really start this collaboration off and talk about why this is important to the overall project. For that, I'm going to pass this over to Brian Tuffin, and he'll take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Next slide. So one of the first things we want to look at is when we decide to bring the manufacturer in, we need to add them to an existing project. We're going to assume that you are currently using Autodesk Construction Cloud for managing your projects and working internally. We want to add the manufacturing team or individuals to that project and control their level of permissions associated inside of that folder structure. Next slide. With that, we're going to also take a look at, once we've assigned people, how we're going to get updated information out to the manufacturer. This process happens to be publishing. Our active Revit model that we're working on is not going to be the model that they're going to see. They're not going to see updates instantly as we synchronize. We're going to control how often we send those updates and how often the manufacturer gets new releases of our model for information sharing. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and go live and walk through that process a little bit.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to pass you presentership.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Everybody should be seeing my monitor right now. So what you're looking at, I've already logged in to my Autodesk Construction Cloud account and selected my factory layout project. As a project administrator, I get the ability to add any individual that I want to inside of here. You'll notice Mark's already a part of this project. He's listed as a BIM manager. BIM manager is controlling his rights, and he is an administrator. Typically, I would not recommend making an outside person administrator. For demonstration purposes, Mark is an administrator. When we go to add a user, we're picking from a list of already pre-populated members inside of our hub that are available to be a part of it. In this case, I'm just going to use Adriana as an example. I'm going to go ahead and add her, but before I add, I want to make sure to take a look at the company that she's a part of. We want to assign a company inside of here so that we can, instead of adding users at a permissions level, we can add company at a permissions level. That way I can bring in everybody from Acme Manufacturing and give everybody at that company same level of permissions. I don't have to worry about each individual person. Roles come into play when determining what type of level of access they have on individual folders and how much they can change things. I'm going to go ahead and leave her as a project administrator. And then I want to take a look at the construction cloud modules that I want to assign. Docs is going to be the file sharing component. Design collaboration is going to be the Revit interaction, along with model clash detection. And I also want to use build, since we'll be talking not only about markups, we'll also be talking about generating issues and tracking issues. You do have the ability to add everything inside of here if you want to. It's completely up to you. As soon as I hit invite, you'll notice that nothing's happened until that person accepts the invite. Then they'll be brought into that project. Let's go ahead and move forward here a little bit and go into the document management component. The doc side is the entitlement component. If you have AEC collections, you're entitled to Autodesk docs. And inside of here, we have folder structures. This is the folder structure that I've chosen. You have full control over that folder structure. As I start drilling down into the structure under design models, I've got my Revit architectural files that I'm working on with multiple versions inside of here. And we've got a manufacturer folder structure. At any point in time, I can come in and assign permissions. If that user is not an administrative level or have administrative rights to the document side, I can control what level of permissions that person has. One of the key things I want to point out here is we can do it by name, email address, role, or company. A lot of the times I like to use role or company to assign that. And then I can start to look at what level of access you want them to have. Typically, since it's manufacturer, it's their content, their information, I would give them edit capabilities. So next steps, I'm going to go into Revit right off the bat, and I'm going to go in and open up this start project. I happen to have it open right now, just so we can take a look at it and see what's going on. I'll kind of show you what we see inside of here. Zoom back in. We're going to be working in this area, kind of working right inside of here, adding some information. But before I can publish this and make it available for Mark's company to see, I have to go into my collaboration and take a look at some published settings. I need to control what I want to issue out there for Mark to be able to use. So inside of published settings, I can create a set, a news coordination set if I want to, and then start to check the views that I want to share with them. We have multiple options to choose what we're looking at. We don't have to give them access to everything, or we can give them access to everything. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, when you run the publish command, it's not publishing from the active file you're working on. So you'll always want to run a synchronize first. What the publish command does is it's taking the active cloud-based model and it's running the publish from there. That way you can continue to work in the background. To run that publish, I want to take a look at Manage Cloud Models. This is an on-demand component inside of the Autodesk Construction Cloud. We do have the option to schedule this on a weekly basis. A lot of times that's not often enough. IMAGINiT does have a utility called Clarity that can help you automate that a little bit more. But as we're inside of a project, you'll notice we're looking at every single Revit model. When I see that Revit model, I can go over and you notice there's a little tiny blue arrow that allows you to publish the latest. I'm going to go ahead and run Publish Latest. And it's telling me, hey, that's running in the background. So we're good to go. I can go ahead and close down. Ooh, it got big. I can close down that window and continue working. Now, that Publish Latest takes a little bit of time. Let me go back into my cloud here. I'm going to close out. I'm going to refresh my screen. And you'll notice I'm at model 16, version 16. Every time I publish, it's going to create a new version. Yes, we can see what's changed from version to version. You'll notice version 17 because it's working on the publish and it's spinning. This will take just a little bit of time for it to process. Typically, minute and a half is kind of what I see. A lot of the times I'll go do things in the background. With that, Mark, I'm going to pass it over to you to take a look at how you're going to bring the information into Inventor. And you should be the presenter now.
Thank you, Brian. So here I'm showing my screen again. I'm also inside the Autodesk Construction Cloud here. And while Brian's model is finishing up there, I'm actually going to be taking a look at it, because one of the great things about this environment is I don't have Revit as a manufacturer. It's not a license I typically utilize. So, being a manufacturer, I'm just going to be using Inventor, the manufacturing product line to do these things. So in order for me to see his model, in order to kind of collaborate and work with him and kind of bridge those gaps that typically exist, I don't want to have to download, a big viewable file. I don't want to have to worry about that file being out of date, things like that. So what I'm going to do is go into an architecture folder here, the one that Brian was publishing. You can see that one is still spinning, but once that finishes, I'm actually going to come in here and mark it up. So let me just grab this one quick. Still doing a little bit of processing though. I'm just going to look at 16 for now. You can see that one actually says not current. Now, the difference between Brian's 16 and 17 was nothing really, so I'm not too concerned about that. But what I'm going to do is kind of look at the sheet here in 3D. I'm going to look at production B, the area that I know my piece of machinery is going to go into. And I know the confines of the weight that this machine takes up that I'm going to put in there. And I know this slab that's in there right now really isn't adequate for that. So what I'm going to do is actually create a coordination issue here and say, you know what, before I really get started on this, I want to let Brian know that he needs to have a thicker slab here. So I'm actually going to come in here and say I need a thicker slab for my crane. I'm going to assign this actually to Brian. And he actually gets email notifications of this as well when these come through. So unlike having traditional email communication where I have to kind of say, okay, take a screenshot, upload this file, put this here, put that there, and this is what I want you to look at, we are actually operating from the same environment, the same coordination model. So essentially, he can actually see what I'm talking about much quicker. It takes him right to the issue, very streamlined in that sense from a process maturity standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and put a due date on here where, you know what, I don't need the slab until we actually fabricate and put this guy in. I'm going to put this a couple months out. Okay. So I'll go ahead and publish this as an issue. Okay, there we go. Now from here, Brian's going to take a look at that issue and you can see what that looks like on his end and how we can continue that communication back and forth all inside of one environment. So I'm going to pass this back to you, Brian. And after he does that, I'm actually going to be doing my Inventor work.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen here, sharing my screen. And I've went ahead and opened up the email inside of here. So as Mark mentioned, I received an email notification. This happens to be the 11th issue with it. I do get the ability to go ahead and either open that issue directly. I can view the issue inside of here. I can come into my construction cloud and take a look at open issues if I wanted to. If I knew the area from reading the email I could go directly into the corresponding model and I'd be able to see the issue inside. One of my favorite features that started to come out in 2022, about 6 months ago, give or take, is an issues tab inside of here. So inside of Revit, I can automatically start to see my issues and take a look at what's happening with those issues. It's going to pull up and show issues directly inside of Revit. So I know right off the bat, it looks like in this bay, we're going to need some sort of thickened slab. I do get the option then to come in here and modify that slab if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and check none, go ahead and grab my floor inside of here. And I'm going to go ahead and edit its boundaries. So as I'm editing that boundary, I'm just going to take a stab in the dark. This is just going to kind of be a general space for me. I'm going to finish that. And now I've got a hole in my slab. There's many different ways to place a hole in a slab. It could have been a void. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just cut a hole inside of it. And I'm going to change my slab thickness, make it a little bit thicker here. And I'm going to go ahead and place it in. Personally, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and lock it to it. That way, when I come back, when I know where the equipment is, I can move that. It will update automatically for me. Now, I'm going to finish it. You can see I've got a different slab material here. I've identified it. So I'm going to change this from open to pending. So it's going to be pending until I get more information back from Mark to see exactly where I need to place it. Now, Mark is not going to see the slab change until I go through. I'm going to synchronize yet again. And the reason I'm synchronizing is so that I can push a new publish. That way Mark will see the updates inside of here. And once again, I'm going to go into my construction cloud here, select my project, find the accurate model, and then push out a specific update for him so that he has an updated file to look at. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, and we'll take a little bit of a look at what the workflow will be for Mark.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Yep. There you go, sir.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and let's just jump back to PowerPoint here for a moment. So let's talk about really what's going to be happening here now with the actual project engineering. So the design and communication between these two major CAD platforms of Revit and Inventor has been something that has always been kind of a holy grail over the years that customers have been asking for and wanting to get a tighter connection between these systems. So over the last couple releases, they've made actually some leaps and bounds here. And what it's really geared about, again, is making sure that we're essentially looking at the same model and we're not passing large data sets back and forth that have to be consumed in very unproductive ways. So when we start thinking about what existed before, with Inventor 2020 and older, the name of the game was, well, you could create an RFA, which is a Revit family. And that was typically designed for pieces of equipment like a skid, not an entire production line or anything like that, but more like maybe a family of doors or a family of windows or fixtures. There was also an ADSK format, which tried to bridge some more gaps there with that, where you could also do a SAT file export. The problem with all of these is, as a manufacturer, I typically don't know how a Revit user needs to consume data. And this has kind of always been a conflict back and forth between architects and manufacturers. It's too complex, it's too big. I don't need every nut and screw and bolt and rib on that motor. I just need a space claim. The other problem was there was never any link to this data. So essentially it was consumed once. If I make a change as a manufacturer where I adjust my fixture or my piece of machinery and it drastically changes the space claim or the footprint, there's no link there. And I have to resend a new RFA or a new SAT or a new ADSK file to the architect. So it became kind of something you had to track very diligently to make sure everything was staying in lockstep. So things that had changed more recently is in Inventor 2021, they included any CAD functionality for Revit files. So I can bring a Revit building into an Inventor directly, and it can be referenced. And we'll talk about what that is and showcase how that kind of works. In Inventor 2022, I can actually spit out a Revit file, an RVT, which can be more or less linked inside of Revit so that when I make changes in Inventor and update my RVT, then that can be consumed directly into Revit. Now, there's other tools that have been enhanced in the newer version of Inventor to allow this more simply as well. Now, this is kind of an oxymoron, enhanced simplification, but I love it. Essentially, the simplify command inside of Inventor has grown quite robust, and there's some new options in there for us, as well as something called model states, which is the evolution of level of detail. So level of detail no longer exists now. It's called model states, and it has some great things you can do with it. Now, a lot of these things for interoperability are built upon the desktop connector. This is something that exists when you have the Autodesk docs for Autodesk Construction Cloud, and essentially becomes like a drive on your computer, kind of like a C drive or a D drive, or like a Dropbox drive. but it's synchronized with the Autodesk software. So you can have this connector that you're allowed to put data in there and it'll synchronize automatically for you. And that's actually where I'm going to pull my data from, is this desktop connector. So when we start thinking about the first part of this, right, the RVT usage in Inventor. So bringing in this using the AnyCAD referencing. It's great because I can pull that directly from the Autodesk Docs folder that Brian's Autodesk Construction Cloud is automatically pushing down into my system as he creates these updates. I don't have to go out to the website to get it. It actually comes down to my local hard drive immediately as that synchronizes. So I can bring that in, and if changes occur on his side, I can recognize those. And just like the opposite way, if I put an RVT in there, then he can get notification that that file is there. And I also have tools in Inventor to update that dynamically, so that as I'm making changes to my design, the linked RVT that he's consumed for me can also update. Now, how do we manage some of these things, right? So anyone that has a Vault Professional environment, there is a pathway to use Project Sync, which is a way that you can push data to the construction cloud directly. So maybe you need to push PDFs along with your RVT, or maybe you need to push drawings along with the RVT. So you might need to push collaborating documentation up there. But when it comes to the actual RVT file management, the recommended mechanism is still Autodesk Docs to push that up into the construction cloud. And again, both Project Sync and Autodesk Docs use the desktop connector to perform these operations. So that's a very critical component of managing this sort of collaboration. So what happened with simplification, right? You know, this is something that has been evolving over in the years. I can't think of a release from Inventor where they haven't done something to it. So this most current one, you now have a palette kind of structure to the command. You have a lot more options for the source, the envelopes, the exclude components. Those things are all still there. So remove details also still there. You just get the warm and fuzzies. You know, nothing's really gone there, but it's consolidated to this nice palette. What's really changed is the output, and that'll become more important as I actually demonstrate that to you. There's also some additional options down below for some advanced settings. Again, those still exist, but when we do an RVT, there'll be a special setting that we need to make sure we check. So I'll show you guys that too. And another thing to talk about is model states. So again, this was something kind of new to Inventor 2022. It changes the way that you work with the model in regards to configurations of design, but it can also have the simplification aspects that it always had in the past. So here on the left-hand side is going to be the piece of machinery and the work cell that I'm going to be putting into the Revit model. You can see it has a lot of detail on it. Inside of my CNC machine there, you can see there's a lot of interior detail to that. I have my ribs on my bins. I have people standing around. I don't need those people over there, right? I don't need all this intricate detail. So I can create a model state where I can simplify this down. And if you know anything about level of detail in the past, some of those things still carry into model states. So you can actually link the model states of your subcomponents to a master model state. So you can very quickly change back and forth between simplified design and every piece of detail being shown. Yeah. So let's take a look at this workflow. And we're going to be doing a lot of things in Inventor here first, and then we'll be passing it into Revit as well. So let me jump over to Inventor. Okay, you can see I'm running the dark theme here inside of Inventor 2022. And I currently have a design open. Some things are turned off just for visibility's sake right now, but the first thing I'm going to do is bring in that Revit model. So I'm going to go up here to place. And rather than placing from my workspace, I'm actually going to place from Autodesk Docs. So again, this is just another folder that we have inside of our computer. Here's my ACC hub. And I'm working in the factory layout project, project files, design models, architecture. Okay, and here's the model that I want. Now, if it's out of sync, you can see this currently says V14. The first thing it'll do is make sure that I have the most current version as I'm bringing it in. So I'm going to say open to this, bring it in. Another thing to keep in mind is Brian and I are doing this very consolidated sort of workflow here. So in traditional, process that's going through with this might, these things will basically update in the background very quickly. You might see some things with us in our presentation here just kind of taking a little bit of time to load. That's not uncommon if we're trying to do this all at the same time. But what I'm going to do here with what I brought in is I'm going to say bring in everything. Okay. And there's 1532 elements here, not bad, but I can turn certain things off I don't want. So for instance, I don't need parking. I don't need plants. I don't need the roof. I'm going to take the roof off. Let's take a few other things off. Let's take windows off.
Grab topography.
Yeah, let's get topography off. I don't really need that either. Thank you, Brian. Now, as a manufacturer, some of these things are trial and error because I'm not a Revit user, right? But what's nice is the preview is showing you things that you're turning on and off. It's kind of zoomed out because there's some, big extents there and such, though. I'm just going to turn off.
That's a good thing. As an architect, you can start to control those levels and pull those level indicators in quite a bit, so that's easier for your manufacturer to see what he's turning on or off in the preview image.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I'm going to say okay to this, but before I do that, notice I'm using reference here and not convert. So while I'm bringing this in, I'll talk about some of the differences there. So the difference between reference and convert is pretty important for the AnyCAD technology. When you choose reference, reference basically says, I'm going to constantly look on the hard drive for if that model changes, it's going to give me a lightning bolt that I need to update it, right? So that exists for Creo models, for SolidWorks models, for anything, even a step file can be a reference model nowadays. So you can reference those, and if they change on disk, Inventor says that's changed, let's consume those changes that exist on the model. If I had chosen convert, that's going to take this Revit model and turn it into Inventor-based solids, which really doesn't do well for the overall conversation here. So if I wanted to bring something in and just consume it and never have an update from Brian ever again, that's what I would do. Okay. So it's almost done bringing it in. What's nice about this is I will get a node in my browser with this AnyCAD reference, and it will also show that it is a cloud reference. So we'll have a picture of a cloud in front of it. So here's my Revit building. Let me go ahead and ground this at the origin. Okay, let me hit escape there. Now some things are still turned on because I missed a few components that I don't want to see. So if I expand out this node here, again, that's the cloud reference there, cloud file. Let's see what things I might want to turn off. Well, you know what? I might want to turn off some of these walls on the top to really get into this guy. Let me just kind of do a selection using part priority. Toggle off the visibility of that. Okay, let's get some more of that stuff turned off. I just don't want to see it is all. You can turn them off by entire folders if you want to, but that gets me down in there a little bit. Let's turn off this slab on the upper level. Here we go. Okay, so you can see I'm definitely able to adjust some of these things in the model coming in just for visibility's sake, and you can save those as well. If I need to change this, if I need to edit the import or adjust how I was bringing in data at all, you can right click on it and you can go back and edit the import. You can suppress that or break that link as well. You can also do the check for updates. But the next time I open up this model, next time I open up this assembly, it's going to say, well, I'm going to check for updates. You actually will see that pop up on screen. So it's not something you have to manually keep checking. It's something that Inventor will let you know. All right. So now that I have the building in here, the next thing I want to do, and by the way, there is that bigger slab in there. So I am using the most current version of that. I'm going to go ahead and just turn on the visibility of my machinery. So through the magic of demonstrative technology here, let me just turn this stuff on. It's probably the fastest design you've ever seen done, right? So here I have my machinery placed in. Okay, so I can kind of see where things are laying out. I basically can put my my conveyors, my people, my bins in here. I can do some process flow analysis if I'm using factory design utilities, things like that. But at this point, I'm pretty happy with that piece of machinery. So the next thing I'm going to do is create this set of files as an RVT for Brian to consume. Let me go ahead and turn off the visibility of the BIM model, so you can see a little bit more of what's going on here. Okay. See, again, there's a lot of detail. I got all these little ribs on the bin here. I got the guy standing here. I got my machinery with a lot of faces and edges in it. Some of the nice improvements that took place for Inventor 2022 was actually even better performance on your graphics card for handling faces and edges. They keep updating that every year and as they upgrade the software. I noticed a lot of nice improvements in 2022 for that. But on the Revit side, they don't care about this stuff. It's useless geometry. It can make the file bloated or large. In the past, if I saved this as an RFA file, it would be unwieldy inside of the Revit software. So one of my jobs as the manufacturer, and part of our contract agreement between Brian and I, is I will simplify this down. And that's an important piece of verbiage. That's an important thing for a manufacturer to understand is how is it being consumed by somebody else? Am I giving something they can use, or am I giving them something for no purpose at all? So what I've done is I've created a model state called medium. Now, when I switch over to medium, it's kind of like, again, a level of detail where I'm simplifying things. Model states have a lot of power, a lot of functionality, but this is kind of what I call a legacy feature of what model states can do, and something level of detail always did, where you can simplify things down. Now, I might even have a little web conference with Brian and say, hey, Brian, does this look good to you? Does this look simplified enough for what you're going to use?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Brian. We'll talk to you later. So now that I have Brian's okay about maybe simplification of this, I can even, email him a screen grab or something like that, right? Or put a photo inside the construction cloud and say, is this good for you? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to now save this out as an RVT. So to do that, I'm going to go up here to simplify. Okay. As you recall, these little orange dots here are kind of new features that appear inside the software. These little orange dots are new feature indicators. But what I'm going to do here for my RVT that I'm going to create is I'm choosing that option down here below. This is the new option available inside of Simplify. Before you could use a new part file, you can do a substitute. Now RVT is an option. So with that selected, I'm going to tell it the name of this. I'm going to call this one crane line. You call it crane line. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. For the folder location, now this is really critical. You don't want to just pistol whip through this. You basically want to make sure you choose your Autodesk Docs folder for this, because this location is where Inventor is going to know to update this. I don't want to update it in my project workspace or my Vault workspace. I want it to update it in Autodesk Docs. So I'm going to choose where I want to put this. Choose the Docs folder. Factory layout, project files, design models, manufacturer, and I'm going to call it this crane line right here. It's not an active project, that's okay. Now this button right here is really critical, enable updating. If I turn that off, it's not going to update the RVT. It's not going to give me the option to do that, but I do want that to update. I do also want it to fill the internal voids and also remove the internal parts, and also you can continue to use the color overrides from the source components. So I'll say okay to this. I'm going to overwrite that. Okay, now as this is exporting, I want to talk about a few other things with this. So when you think about BIM collaboration in the past, with RFA files, you had the option to put mechanical component connectors on there. So you can do duct connectors, you could do electrical connectors, you can do pipe connectors. Those you can still do, but they have to be done on an RFA. So for instance, if I were to look at, oh, I don't know, this crane as the example, maybe this crane needs to actually have electrical connectors. Maybe this machine over here that's blue needs to have electrical connectors on it for Brian. I would probably exclude that from my RVT but I would have a footprint on the ground for where it needs to sit. That way, Brian knows where to put that piece of machinery. Okay, that file exists, that's fine. So file created, here we go. So as I was saying, I would have to create that piece of machinery as an RFA. And that RFA then will also be something I would share with him, but he would have then the electrical connectors on it. So he could then plumb things up to it. Now, once this has been created, there will be a node over here for that Revit update. You know what, since that one already existed, it didn't let me recreate that. So let me give it just a slightly different name. We'll just call it this name here. Through the magic of doing this already once today, I actually already have one there for Brian to use though. So really this one should have been updated, not created new. Let me just throw an extra one in there just to show you that node that I think is important. Okay, let that create. So again, once I start making changes to this design, if I have to move some of these bins around, if I have to move the work cell around a little bit, and I need to let Brian know the changes I made to this, I'd want that to update as I see fit. So once this finishes, I'll have a node on the left-hand side where I can right-click and say update for that to actually process those changes.
And as that update is happening, I am actually inside of the Construction Cloud seeing those files update in a lifetime basis.
So one of the most critical things here, again, just to kind of reiterate, is that you have to have communication between yourself and the architect about what's going to be a good model to give them. If I just keep giving them a complete model with all data to it, it's going to be very unwieldy for him to use. You're just not going to have a good time. But that can be part of the communication as well. So Brian could say there's an issue with how complex this is. It's causing issues in my system. I need you to simplify it and give me a new RVT. That can take place in the Construction Cloud too. But as you can see now that this is finished, I have this Revit production crane line up here, and I can right click on that and say update or edit the simplification of it as well. So it gives me quite a bit of power there. So at this time, I'm going to pass this over to Brian again, and he's going to show what this looks like as he's bringing this in.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share again. Everybody should be seeing my screen by now. I'm going to run a quick refresh on my Autodesk Construction Cloud, the dock side of it. And I want to talk about the files here a little bit in the manufacturing side. There's two different ways to look at linking in what Mark provided. So right off the bat, you'll notice I have the production crane line as an RVT file. This is the one that Mark pended or updated just for us a few minutes ago. You'll notice the date is July 26th. It's going to track the date of when he provided it, but the XML log file is version 4. That tracks the different versions of when he's updated information for me. So all those changes can be tracked throughout it inside of here. You'll also notice the new files that he created. Now I've got two separate files inside of here. One is the production crane line. The secondary one is production crane line central file, or CF. There's two separate ways to link in a Revit project from Inventor. One will be to download their Revit file and create a central file of it. And I'll explain why we might want to do that. Or we can just leverage the one that they've created. At any point in any time, I can open this and view it. In the built-in viewer, I don't have to have Revit. I can see all aspects of it. Detail level seems to be fine inside of here. Notice that the people are missing out of here. If for some reason this file starts to get large, you can always make a note, hey, clean this up a little bit more, simplify it a little bit more, make it easier for me. So let's go ahead and switch back over to Revit. So inside of Revit, we're going to take a look at the Insert tab. We want to link a Revit file. Now, as Mark mentioned earlier, we have Desktop Connector. By default, when you go to link in another Revit project file, it's going to take you into your project. This is going to be from external reference of the cloud. We're already in our project. If I go into my project files and start drilling down into the manufacturer folder, you'll notice I am only seeing the central files. Those are the ones that I downloaded as file and created a central file. I do have the ability, however, to go through my PC and pick the desktop connector and load it that way. So I can load his active Revit file and have it automatically update. Now, at this point in time, Autodesk is constantly updating the desktop connector. We're seeing updates happen every 1 to 2 weeks, gaining us greater functionality. If I choose to connect it or link it in through Docs, when I go to publish my Revit file, I will not see that link. That's why I chose in this case to go ahead and do the central file so that we can show that link a little bit deeper. I'm going to go ahead and link that in. I am seeing his information showing up, not only inside of my 3D perspective view, I'm also seeing it inside of the floor plan. From here, I would probably come in and make a modification to that slab, try to clean that up here just a little bit, make changes to the thickened slab situation. I can quickly also see that there's a clash detection inside of here. Instead of looking at the clash detection in Revit, however, I'm going to go ahead and synchronize this. I want to take a look at automatic clash detection capabilities inside of the construction cloud. This will require me to republish the model. So once again, I'm going to come into that Manage Cloud Models. I've already set my page sets ahead of time, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm just going to go in and republish this. As I mentioned earlier, this can be automated through a utility called Clarity, make things just a little bit easier on you. And that window goes very large in some cases. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Look back at my model, and as I refresh it, it's going to tell you it's going from 18 to version 19. Now, a topic for a different conversation is going to be setting up design collaboration to where Mark and I could start publishing information back and forth to each other. But ultimately what I've done is I've set up design collaboration so that I can update things into a shared folder. That shared folder is what I'm starting to look at for my model coordination. Model coordination gives me quite a few capabilities. Model coordination is not a part of Docs, the entitled component that you get with AEC collections. Model coordination is a part of Collaboration Pro or Collaboration component inside. So you'll notice it's taking a look at all the models that have been published in that shared file. It's running an analysis, and in some cases, you know, my production B start, I've got 88 collisions. That might be things that are physically in my model colliding. It's only going to look at physical collisions at this point in time. We're not looking at soft collisions, clear spaces that are required. I'm going to switch over to my clash. And inside here, the clashes, I'm looking at each view and seeing what we have going on. I'm going to go ahead and pick on this set of collisions and kind of get a report of what's happening inside of here. I can see it in a plan view. All the collisions are inside here at red. I can go into a 3D view. But what I really like about this is I can come in and click on it and it will zoom right to it and give me more information. Now, I know exactly what's going on here. There really isn't a collision. It's set on the floor and it's physically touching the floor. That's why it's seeing it as a collision. So I could say not an issue. Why? It's valid penetration. I do have to give it a comment before I hit OK. And now that collision goes away. it will no longer report that collision. But I do have an issue right here. The crane is actually going into my ductwork. Well, unfortunately, the duct's already been placed inside of here, and we need to take a look at options with this crane. So I do want to generate an issue. I'm going to generate an issue associated with it, and I'm going to get a dialog popping up here, similar to the one Mark created earlier for the slab. And I'm going to start filling it out. Okay, it's a coordination clash detection. And one of the interesting things is it's tying it to that exact part. So Mark will be able to see exactly what it is. It's tracked with that part, and I do have an active log history of what's happening. Early on in the very beginning, I mentioned when we assign people to a project, we want to assign them to a company or a role. Part of the reason I want to do that is instead of assigning it to an individual person, I could assign it to a role of maybe plant floor manufacturer or crane manufacturer as a role. Or I could assign it to a company, Acme Manufacturing. In this case, I'm just going to assign it to Mark. If I was to assign this to a company or a role, anybody in that company or role would get notifications. I could give it location information, location details, due date. You know, this is kind of a critical issue. I want it done by Friday, if at all possible. It's going to link in a photo of what that collision is, and I can also add additional references. So I can add additional cut sheets. Maybe the structural engineer needs a little bit more information on it. I could add that. So I'm just going to ask Mark to go ahead and adjust this and drop this down by 200 millimeters. I'm going to go ahead and select submit in this case, and I can close out of this preview window. Mark's now going to get notification that there is an update. There's more information inside of here. I can close out of it, and I'm going to pass this over to Mark to take a look at that collision. You'll notice since I did remove that one collision, saying it's not an issue, and the crane one, I started an issue from it. It's now reading as 0 collisions because we're in the process of working on that collision. With that, Mark, I'm going to make you the presenter.
Thank you.
Oh, always forget the yes button. There you go, sir.
All right, so here in the construction cloud, you can see that I currently have a new issue being shown there. So I will get a notification. I did get an email for this as well, so I can access it from my email, or if I have this up, I can just click on it. I can see that coordination clash there was assigned to me, and like, oh, okay, well, my my crane needs to be a little bit shorter. Now, I gave them that crane because that crane was essentially the standard crane that we make for everybody. So now it's going to be a special, and I'm going to go ahead and say, well, this is no longer open. This will be pending. Okay, I'm going to go over to Inventor, and I'm going to make a change to my crane. Just adjust this column, and we'll go down. Oops. That. We'll adjust this column down 200. There we go. Return out of that. One of my constraints failed. Let me just go ahead and fix that one quick. So I'm using a joint on here for that. There we go. Now I can also set a rotate here. I can actually go ahead and drive this if I want to show movement in this. And of course, you can also do positional representations. So if I wanted to show this crane in different positions for Brian, such as, you know, let's say the full work state versus the rest state, I could do that. For this purpose, though, I'm just going to go ahead and have the crane as we see it. I'm going to, no, I don't really need to reorient it. You guys get the point. So essentially, this is now a little bit shorter. And what I need to do is now update my RVT. So I would choose update here and let that update. And while that's updating, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the construction cloud. We say this is no longer pending. This is now in review. Brian, you need to review this now for this clash. Now, for time, we're not going to continue this feedback loop because it's going to be a little bit repetitive now at this point. And I want to jump us back to our presentation here. But essentially, you can see that this is now continuing to send emails, creating an audit trail. I can add comments all throughout this process as I'm doing this. I could even say, well, that's going to cost you, Brian. But you know what? It's going to cost them a lot less than moving that duct system. There we go. So back over to our PowerPoint here. Just do a little bit of a wrap up. So our takeaways today is we definitely captured some ways to provide critical BIM information to building system designers from the manufacturing side of things. Things that were just unwieldy or hard to do in the past, or we provided PDFs which were flat and not usable really at all for a Revit user. We also understood techniques of consuming and identifying changes to project data and how those can be synchronized very easily back and forth without sending massive files through other systems that become disconnected from your design environment. We also realized the bi-directional communication between Revit and Inventor and some of the nuances around that. And we recognized the communication process for tracking these markups and audits on these issues as we do it, and tracking those issues inside that project. So essentially, what's the next steps then? Well, for any subscribers of Productivity Now, we also have a new features content in there for not only Revit, but also Inventor. And we've also recently added the Autodesk Construction Cloud as a course inside of Productivity Now as well, which is one of our standard support levels for a lot of our clients. Ascent also, our sister company, can help with technical writing and process documentation if you need assistance in creating contract verbiage that needs to go back and forth between manufacturers and architects. Because a lot of times, a lot of these agreements don't exist and they're never thought of by people initiating projects. But they're a great way to make sure that this is the expectations for how we're going to communicate and how we're going to work as an organization together. So our sister company, Ascent, can do a great job with assisting with that. And from our professional services side, clearly we have a lot of consulting knowledge around this sort of technology. We've been doing this for a very long time. So we can assist with software implementation, as well as if you have an as-built that's currently a set of drawings and PDFs that need to turn into a 3D model of some kind. So perhaps in your own facility, if you don't have Revit, or if you don't have a Revit model built, but you still want to use some of this technology, you can bring reality capture point clouds into Revit and other systems and still kind of have this back and forth. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Obviously, we'd ask you just contact your local friendly neighborhood sales representative to assist with that. But to tidy this up, we're just going to have some open Q&A. So I'm going to pass that back to you, Cassie.